Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Young here and welcome to what we know so far about Assassin's Creed 4. It's been a freaking long time since I've made a video about this highly anticipated game, but to make up for it, I've got something special for you guys. In this one video, you will find everything you need to know about this game from the time this game was announced to the date this video was released. I'm gonna save you guys the trouble of having to search through dozens of sources to get all the information you need. I've compiled everything in this one video, so after you're done watching this, you are set. I know there's been a couple of trailers and gameplay videos released since my last video, so I'll be making heavy use of those to perform my analysis and to put this video together. There's a lot to talk about, so without further ado, let's dive right into it. You could say that Assassin's Creed 4 is both a sequel and a prequel to its predecessor. It's a sequel in the sense that the modern-day timeline takes place after the events of Assassin's Creed 3. The year is 2013. The protagonist is no longer Desmond Miles. Rather, the main character is simply the player himself or herself, acting as an analyst for Abstergo Entertainment, a subdivision of Abstergo Industries in Montreal, Quebec, that focuses on multimedia products. Their primary product is a gaming console version of the Animus, which has successfully sold worldwide. Through the use of these gaming consoles containing genetic memories, Abstergo has set in motion a plan to influence the general public on a worldwide scale to suit the Templars' needs. To further their goals, however, the player character, who is serving as an Abstergo analyst, is called in at some point to dive into the memories of one of the assassin ancestors. Through the use of genetic cloud servers, the Animus now allows anyone to dive into another's memories. While the modern-day timeline takes place after the events of Assassin's Creed 3, the Ancestor Timeline will explore what happened before Haytham Kenway and Connor's timeline. The player character will be reliving the memories of Edward Kenway, father to Haytham Kenway and grandfather to Connor. Edward Kenway was born on March 10, 1693 to an English father and a Welsh mother. To his misfortune, he was born in poverty, which caused him to grow up into a reckless and selfish young man with a knack for drinking. What he lacked in money, he had in charm and charisma. In his early teens, his family moved to Bristol in southwest England, during which he met and married Carolyn Scott, with whom he had his daughter, Jenny Kenway. It was a happy marriage at first, but Carolyn soon grew tired of Edward's inability to take his role as a husband and a father seriously. But what truly led them to their separation was Edward's dream and ambition to sail the West Indies as a privateer, which was something that Carolyn did not approve of. Edward was determined to prove his worth to his family, so he pursued his dream to become a privateer. In 1712, Edward boarded a ship headed to Jamaica in hopes to serve under renowned privateer Benjamin Hornigold, but to Edward's misfortune, after having stayed 6 months in Jamaica, the Treaty of Utrecht was signed in early 1713. The peace that it brought meant that privateers were no longer needed. Out of work, his passion for sailing soon turned into piracy, earning 2 years of experience as a pirate and gaining command of his warship, the Jackdaw. During the time, he also met many infamous names like Benjamin Hornigold, Calico Jack, Charles Vane, Blackbeard, Anne Bonny, and more. Eventually, he also runs into the Assassin Order when searching for an object that promised him wealth and power, likely a piece of Eden, and along the way he meets new names like Adiwali, the assassin responsible for bringing in Edward Kenway into the Assassin Order and an important friend of Edward's. The combination of all these events and circumstances set up the story of Assassin's Creed 4. Within the game, players will take control of Edward Kenway and aid him in his quest to prove his worth to his family and in his quest to find wealth and power, a motivation that may change as he pursues his path within the Assassin Order and as the story unfolds. Within this quest, players will take control of the Jackdaw, a key ingredient that lies at the core of the Assassin's Creed 4 experience. With it, players will be able to seamlessly transition from traveling by land to traveling by sea. At sea, players will have the ability to set sail to any one of the over 50 locations found throughout the game. Some of these locations are small islands in which players may find loot and treasure, and others are large cities akin to what has been seen in past Assassin's Creed games. The 3 major cities of Assassin's Creed 4 are Havana, Kingston, and Nassau, each with their own unique flavor. Havana is the most traditional city in AC4, with its busy streets and markets alongside its many buildings and landmarks. The city is described as beautiful and European in flavor, here, somewhat reminiscent of Venice from Assassin's Creed 2. Kingston is described as a mixture of urban and nature. The flora and fauna are intermingled with the city's streets and structures. The environment is dense, and players can expect to constantly be changing height as they take advantage of both structures and trees to parkour and freerun. Finally, there is Nassau, which is known as the Pirate Haven. If the city could be described in one word, it's chaotic. Streets are both wide and narrow, disorganized and chaotic. The city itself is built on a slope, so building heights vary throughout. Uniformity is the last word one would use to describe Nassau. Also interesting about Nassau is the fact that it's an island, meaning the city is surrounded by beautiful beaches that contain landmarks like sunken ships. The combination of the sea and its over 50 locations, including the 3 major cities, make up the entirety of Assassin's Creed 4's world. Now, it's great to have a giant game world, but what's most important is that the game world itself is densely packed with fun things for players to do, which is something that Ubisoft is hard at work on. Let's first talk about gameplay at sea, which will expand upon the mechanics introduced in Assassin's Creed 3's Naval Combat system. The sea itself, for those who don't know, takes around half an hour to sail across if you go from one end to the other, and it makes up for 40% of missions according to the game's developers. And unlike in Assassin's Creed 3, players won't have to go through a menu to access the sea. The transition is as seamless as hopping on board and sailing the ship. Once players set sail with the Jackdaw, they are free to go anywhere within the game's Caribbean world. Players can choose to find new islands, ruins, and treasures, engage the enemy in naval combat, track down assassination targets, hunt sea creatures, and more, all which will be explained in due time. And as they are sailing, players will have access to a playlist of songs that their crew can sing, and this playlist will grow as players progress through the game. All of these features of naval exploration are tied together by one thing: Edward Kenway's ship, the Jackdaw, which is almost a character within itself. The Jackdaw is to Edward Kenway and the player what the Millennium Falcon is to Han Solo, or what the Enterprise is to Kirk. These ships are their babies. Throughout the game, players will be actively and constantly upgrading the ship by adding and upgrading crew members, defensive reinforcements, and offensive weapons. This brings us to Naval Combat. Those who played Assassin's Creed 3 will likely feel right at home for the most part. Players can once again change the speed of the ship by changing the sail settings through the press of a button. Naval Combat will also feel familiar with the ability to use a combination of various cannons, round types, and weapons like swivel guns, and like before, the positioning of the ship will decide the difference between unleashing Armageddon upon the enemy ships or Armageddon being unleashed upon the player. Despite the many similarities, do expect to have access to new weapons in Assassin's Creed 4, like mortars, explosive mines, and front cannons that will make naval combat even more dynamic. Just don't expect to have access to all of these right off the bat. Players will have to earn money, resources, and blueprints to apply these upgrades. Confirmed upgrades include the ability to add up to 50 cannons on each side of the ship, along with the ability to add and upgrade swivel guns, explosive mines, round shots, heated shots, chain shots, iron balls, explosive mines, mortars, and naval rams. All of these tools will play essential roles in battling the game's 6 different enemy ship archetypes, along with forts, all which may impede the player. Players must use different and specific types of weapons against each of these 6 different types of ships plus forts to take them down in the most efficient manner. So then the question becomes, how does one gain the necessary resources for these upgrades? There are a number of ways, everything from pillaging, completing missions, finding treasure and loot, to taking over enemy ships. Footage has already shown some of these methods. Here, for example, we are shown how treasure hunting allows players to find blueprints that will allow upgrades to be built. And here we are shown a new feature of naval combat, boarding demised ships. According to the developers, virtually every ship can be boarded and looted, so there will be no shortage of resources if you go look for them. Before players engage enemy ships, they can actually use Edward's spyglass to get a look at the quantity of resources ships carry, allowing players to decide strategically if certain encounters are worth it. When your ship and theirs come together, the ships and their parts create a seamless environment for Edward that allows him to uniquely traverse to the enemy ship, allowing for things like stealth assassination of the captain. After the captain is killed, players will gain new crew members and loot supplies like rum, wood, money, and ammunition. Players will also have one of 3 choices to choose from after taking over a ship for extra perks. they can choose to recruit extra crew members, capture the ship and send it to Edward's fleet, or salvage the ship and use its parts to repair the Jackdaw if it took too much damage. Resources can also be obtained by pillaging forts after they've been destroyed through naval combat. Now, one question you guys may have is, once players obtain the necessary resources, how do they go about using them to upgrade the Jackdaw? That is something that I will cover more once I begin talking about gameplay by land. Before that, I want to talk about a new mechanic integrated into Assassin's Creed 4's naval system: storms. While we have seen storms to a degree in Assassin's Creed 3, in Assassin's Creed 4, storms will actually have strategic value thanks to water spouts. These will not only force players to navigate more carefully during storms, but developers also hint at players being able to use these spouts to their advantage by baiting enemies into them. But if players mismanage these storms, they can get sucked in as well, which will result in heavy damage to the ship and loss of crew members. As you guys can see, naval gameplay and combat make a return in a big way. While in Assassin's Creed 3 naval gameplay was more of a mini-game, in Assassin's Creed 4, naval gameplay will take center stage. Alright, we've talked enough about gameplay at sea. Now let's talk a bit about gameplay by land, which makes up for 60% of the game's missions, according to developers. The smallest pieces of land you will find are playas. These aren't necessarily part of the over 50 locations found in the game world because they're so small and serve such specific purposes. There are over 75 playas in the game, and in each one, players will find something essential that will aid in upgrading the Jackdaw, like treasure maps that lead to treasures, like blueprints for upgrades. In this particular footage, for example, the playa contains the corpse of a pirate that's carrying a treasure map, leading players to an island called Misteriosa. Islands will also be a huge part of the game. In these islands, players will find things such as ancient ruins that may contain valuable treasure, most of the time guarded by guards and soldiers of certain factions. For those who want to sneak into the islands, they will provide means for players to sneak inside through bushes, trees, cliffs, and structures for players to use to their advantage. Along the way, players may also find hostages taken by guards. If players manage to free them by killing guards undetected, then these hostages can be recruited into the Jackdaw. Within islands, players may also find themselves in remote fishermen villages, which are perfect locations to find harbor masters. These are the NPCs that will allow players to upgrade the Jackdaw. These islands and remote villages will also serve as locations for some of the game's many missions, whether they be simple fetch quests, assassinations, or large-scale battles. And then there are the game's sprawling cities, Havana, Kingston, and Nassau. Much like in past games, within these cities, players can expect to find shops and merchants to upgrade Edward, side missions and assassinations to fulfill, notoriety to maintain, structures to parkour and navigate through, landmarks to explore, locations to discover, collectibles to find, and viewpoints to synchronize, which can now be used as fast travel points in this game. Developers promise that players will be given much more freedom in terms of assassinations and exploration. Assassinations have been designed like sandboxes rather than instances, allowing players freedom of choosing their own time and method of assassination. This means that the 100% synchronization bullshit is gone, meaning players will no longer be punished for not assassinating targets a certain way. Also gone are the synchronization walls that prevented players going to places they're not supposed to, which brings me to freedom of exploration. While I'm sure these walls ensured that players wouldn't stray too much, they also broke immersion. In Assassin's Creed 4, instead of walls, they will simply find themselves fighting much tougher enemies. Speaking of enemies, within the cities, players can also expect to see familiar factions like the British, and new factions like Spaniards, and what could possibly be the French roaming around. Players can expect to see these factions fighting each other on occasions, both by land and sea. So in summary, a combination of playas, remote islands and villages, and large cities, along with the many activities that players can choose to engage in within each, make up the entirety of Assassin's Creed 4's land portion. Now, of course, to get around land and to perform these activities, one has to understand how Edward Kenway functions. For the most part, those who have played and mastered Connor in Assassin's Creed 3 are likely to feel right at home in Assassin's Creed 4. Movement simply requires the flick of the analog stick, which can instantly turn to parkour by holding down a button. Face buttons can activate commands like jumping, fast walking, shooting, and attacking or assassinating, and for the first time, shooting no longer solely relies on an auto-aim system. Players now have the choice to free aim like a third-person shooter. During stealth mode, players can hide behind cover or lean on edges, use tactics like whistling to lure targets, and when enemies are close enough, players can execute swift assassinations by land or air. Stealth is further enhanced by the trademark feature known as Eagle Vision, which allows players to easily spot enemies. Players can also tag visible enemies to see them through walls, which should help in planning assassinations and stealth maneuvers. When engaged in combat, the face buttons will change to commands like using equipped weapons and tools and counterattacking, along with button combinations that will bring about different effects like stunning, disarming, throwing, and killing enemies. By default, Edward will have access to tools like the assassin outfit, the hidden blades, a sword, and a gun, and of course players can use the money they've earned to buy new and better swords and guns, along with ammunition such as bullets, rope darts, and poison darts for the new blowpipe. There are also certain unique types of upgrades like armor upgrades, extra weapon slots, and extra holsters, the latter two which allow for dual wielding, or usage of 4 guns to execute 4 consecutive shots. These types of upgrades require certain materials that can be obtained through the harpooning system. Hunting was a big part of upgrading Connor in Assassin's Creed 3. Harpooning plays a similar role. In this game, by hunting some of these sea creatures, players can obtain the necessary materials for certain upgrades. Thus far, only 2 out of the 6 harpoonable sea creatures have been revealed, the whale and the great white shark. Footage of harpooning a great white shark has been shown, and here's basically how the minigame works. First, players have to navigate the Jackdaw to an area where they can find the desired creature. Once that's done, players will essentially be stripped naked of their weapons and tools, except for a boat and a limited number of harpoons. From then on, it's about timing, aiming, and shooting. The closer players allow the creature to get, the more damage the harpoon will deal, but of course the higher the risk there is for the player to get attacked and take some damage. When players successfully strike the creature, the harpoon will embed itself as the prey attempts to flee, which will drag the player and the boat around at incredible speeds. If players manage to kill the creature, they can take it back to the Jackdaw. If players run out of harpoons before killing the creature, then the creature will escape and players can choose to attempt another hunt. And of course, if players take too much damage, Edward will become shark meal. Now, for those who are into killing and gutting animals like in Assassin's Creed 3, do not worry, hunting land animals is also a viable option. Alright, we have talked about gameplay for both land and sea, but we still haven't talked about underwater gameplay. That's right folks, there's an entire living and breathing world under the sea with dozens of species roaming around. Under the sea, players will also find sunken ships and lost treasure. What's more interesting is that if players dive into the right location, they may end up finding underwater entrances to caves, which could also contain treasure. Players can dive into the sea in a number of ways. The first way is to simply dive from the surface. With this method, Edward will retain his outfit and tools, but will not be able to get too far underwater. The second method is through a tool called the diving bell, which according to developers were real devices used by sailors and divers. Edward can hold on to this heavy object and dive into the sea at an extremely fast rate, allowing players to reach deep into the sea without wasting much breath. These are actually required in order to reach points of interest under the sea, like sunken ships or underwater cave entrances. But in order to use diving bells, Edward has to leave all his tools behind, like during harpooning, leaving him completely exposed, so the players will have to be much more careful about their approach. Most of what I've talked about thus far takes place inside the Animus, but gameplay outside of the Animus will also play a significant role. At any time, players can choose to exit the Animus and explore Abstergo Entertainment, but this portion does feature a handful of mandatory missions with a clear story arc. These missions will feature no combat or any sort of assassin gameplay whatsoever. Rather, the developers have described this portion's gameplay as becoming a modern-day pirate. It's all about exploring Abstergo, eavesdropping, and hacking. Players will also be finding audio tapes throughout Abstergo that will tell the story of key Abstergo Industries employees from 1980 to 1981. It was also hinted that players will meet familiar characters from past games, although who specifically wasn't mentioned. It is important to note that the modern-day character is quite literally you. The developers will not give players dialogue choices. They won't enforce any ideals, anything like that. Rather, they will present two sides of the conflict, and it's up to the player to choose which side they like best. The only thing forced upon the player is the fact that he or she is an Abstergo employee. Keep in mind that while Abstergo is owned by Templars, not all employees are part of the Order. The same goes for you as the player character, and since players will play the role of an Abstergo employee, the developers have hinted at players getting their own office to interact with. Note the many figurines within the office. Perhaps they are collectibles that players can find throughout Abstergo. Before I take my leave, I would like to talk about multiplayer. There's actually a bit of story in regards to the existence of multiplayer. As mentioned before, Abstergo is selling a gaming console version of the Animus as part of their plan to influence the general public. And it is through these consoles that the multiplayer mode is being experienced. Competitive and cooperative modes will make a return from past games, and it's safe to expect at least a new mode or two when the game launches. In fact, at E3 it was revealed that players can make their own game mode through a feature called the Game Lab, which allows players to modify over 200 parameters of a game. It should be interesting to see what crazy things players come up with when the game launches. Confirmed avatar characters include the Adventurer, the Cutthroat, the Dandy, the Duelist, Lady Black, the Mercenary, the Navigator, the Physician, the Puppeteer, and the Rebel. Confirmed locations thus far include Saba Island, Santa Lucia, and Portobello. Not much else is known about multiplayer, unfortunately, but if you've played multiplayer from past games, then you already know most of what you need to know. And with that, I would like to conclude what we know so far about Assassin's Creed 4, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you took notes because that was a shit ton of information. But if you've inhaled everything presented here, then you know literally everything about Assassin's Creed 4. Now, of course, new information is bound to come as the game nears its release, so to be further updated on Assassin's Creed 4, be sure to join the NASIAN and subscribe to Young Gear. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you very much, and Young out.